Good Erev Shabbos, everybody. This week's portion is out of Lech Lecha. As it says in last week's portion, Avraham, his wife Sarah, they left the vicinity of Ur Kasdim. Ur Kasdim is the area in which Avraham lived, and he left and he went to the land of Israel as God instructed him to do. And there Avraham is chosen by God, as we say every day in our davening, as we quote from the prophet Nehemiah, "Umatzasa es levavoi ne'eman lefonecha," and God found that his heart was faithful and true. V'choreis imoi habris, and God established a covenant with Avraham. He established this covenant, and what is the covenant? As it says in Parshas Lech Lecha, this is the bris bein habesarim, the covenant between the parts, in which God says to Avraham, take various animals. Avraham divided them in half, and God then said to Avraham that indeed there will be exile for your children, your descendants, but I shall take them forth from this land of their suffering. I shall bring them out with great wealth, and I shall give them this land of Israel. And God delineates all of the areas, the borders that shall become the possession of Klal Yisrael. And it says, Vayehi Hashemesh ba, as the night began to fall, Va'alotahoya, there was great darkness. V'hinei, and behold, Tanur Oshan v'lapid Eish, a smoking, fiery, burning furnace with lightning bolts of fire, Asher Ova ben Exar, that had already gone between these parts. And this was known as the covenant between the parts. The commentaries ask that this entire episode of this covenant is all in present tense. God speaks to Avraham. It says Avraham falls asleep and God speaks to him. Everything is in present tense, except for this particular verse, that the smoking furnace with the lightning bolts contained inside doesn't say over ben Agzarim, are passing through the parts, but asher ovar, that have passed through, in past tense. Why does it speak of the past tense? We find that Avraham, when he left Ur Kasdim, our sages tell us, what is this Ur Kasdim? The word Ur can mean a furnace. Indeed, the king was imposing his curriculum of idolatry unto the entire generation. And there was one iconoclast, one person who stood against him, and that was Avraham. Avraham said that the idolatry is false. There is only one true creator, and he is the one who has created and is in control of everything that exists. It is all recorded by our creator. And Avraham's teachings were so clear and so perfect and so impactful. He developed many followers and became a threat to the king. And the king said to Avram, either you denounce your faith, or I shall cast you into this fiery furnace, the Ur Kasdim, the fires of Kasdim. And Avraham said he would rather martyr himself than denounce his faith in the one true God. And the king threw Avraham in the furnace, and miraculously, he was unharmed. And everybody stood in awe. When Avraham's brother Haran was asked, do you now side with Avraham or with the king? He says, I side with Avraham after seeing this. I clearly side with Avraham. And he was thrown into the very same furnace. And he was destroyed and consumed by the fire. Clearly, the rescue of Avraham was a divine miracle. This is the Ur Kasdim. And this is what God says later to Avraham. He says that I am, by this covenant between the parts, God says to him that Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, I am God, that took you from Ur Kasdim. I took you from these fires to give you this land, the land of Israel, as an inheritance. Parshas Drachim asks a very, very difficult question. How was Avraham permitted to martyr himself? One is not allowed to commit suicide. This was one of the mitzvahs given to Noach. After he left the ark and was permitted to slaughter animals to consume, but he was told no human life shall be taken. We're not allowed to take our own lives under any circumstances. Now in the Torah in Parshas Emor, there is a mitzvah in which it says, "V'nikdashti b'sef b'nei Israel." If a Jew is being threatened with death or to denounce his faith, then he has a mitzvah to sanctify the name of God by martyring himself. But that's for the children of Israel. But as of this point in time, Avraham, we cannot say was Jewish. The Torah wasn't officially given to him. He did not, as of yet, have the mitzvah of the bris milah, the covenant between God and the chosen one. How then was Avraham, who legally at that point in time was considered to be a descendant of Noah, a Gentile, how was he permitted to martyr himself? That was a transgression. We find in the Haftorah for this week's Parsha that it's taken from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40. And here there is a verse in which he says, "V'ato Yisrael avdi Yaakov asher bacharticha," and you, Israel, my servant Jacob that I have chosen, Zera Avraham ohavi, you are the seed, the offspring of Avraham, my beloved. This is a phrase that we don't see in reference to anyone else. The fact that Yaakov is called my servant, we see Kolev was called God's servant. Moshe Rabbeinu was called God's servant. Yeshua is called God's servant. Israel is called God's servant. But where do we find this unique expression that God says, you are my beloved? This is exclusively found by Avraham. Avraham ohavi, Avraham my beloved. How is Avraham more beloved than Yitzchak? Yitzchak, who when he heard that he was chosen to be a human sacrifice unto God, he willingly and lovingly allowed himself to be bound and to be slaughtered. And yet Yitzchak is not crowned with this title, only Avraham. The Bnei Yissaschar says, indeed, Avraham was not halachically permitted to martyr himself. When he was given the choice, you are to denounce your faith in this God you speak of, or I will throw you in the furnace. Halachically speaking, Avraham should have said, I hereby denounce my faith. I'm not allowed to commit suicide. I'm not allowed to do it. But Avraham couldn't bring himself to do this. Avraham's love for Hashem, his bond for Hashem was so great that Avraham reasoned and said, better I should transgress and sanctify the name of the one true sole creator and master of all that exists, than I should follow the laws. Let me do a transgression for the sake of sanctifying God's name, because to denounce my faith, I can't do that. My love for God is so strong, I can't do this. No matter what the circumstances, even if it meant an individual saving his own life, he could not be unfaithful to his wife, who is so beloved to him. Imagine a person who was told, you are to be unfaithful to your wife, or I shall take your life. What would his wife say? His wife would say, I love you so much, do it, it's okay, do it, I forgive you, do it. And the man says, I can't. My love for you is so great that I can't, even if strictly speaking, I can't do it. That's my bond of love that I have for you. This is what Abraham demonstrated by the furnaces of custom. My love for Hashem is so great that I would rather suffer the consequences of a transgression, as long as it means sanctifying my God, my beloved one's name. This is why Abraham indeed transgressed to sanctify Hashem's name as a result of this remarkable boundless love. And this is what Hashem responds. Avraham, I have you, the prophet Isaiah says. Avraham, he is my beloved. There have been many who have martyred themselves, but they've done so halachically. Jews have done so because Jews have a mitzvah, but Avraham, as of that time, had no mitzvah, was a transgression, and nevertheless he did it out of an expression of his boundless love. That's how Avraham earned the title, he indeed is my beloved. And this, the Mefarshim say, is the meaning in the verse. How is it that Avraham, as it says, the prophet Nehemiah says that we say every morning, Matzasas levavai neman, you found his heart to be true and faithful, and therefore you established the covenant that you will be exclusively bound to Avraham and his descendants. They shall carry the sign of God on their flesh with the circumcision, the bris milah. It is unto them that you said, I will be their God uniquely with this relationship, and the land of Israel will be theirs for all eternity. Even when they're in exile, the land is still theirs and they shall return. How is it that Abraham was able to be worthy of this covenant? This is what it states, that the fiery smoking furnace with the lightning bolts contained within had already passed. What does it mean it passed? It should say it's passing through the parts of the animals that Abraham selected. They say, no. Where did this fire come from? Where did this fire to demonstrate the existence of God and this smoke, where did this come from? It came from that which already transpired in the past. When? When the fire of love unto God was burning passionately in the heart and soul of Avraham, to the extent that he would allow himself to transgress and be thrown into a furnace to show his love and sanctify God's name. That fire, that's the fire that kindled this furnace. That's where the fire came from. And that's the fire that demonstrated this covenant between God and Klal Yisrael. This is not just an incident describing how remarkable Avraham was and Sarah, but rather this is describing the unique properties that are contained within their DNA and the Jewish souls that emanate from them. Every Yiddish neshama has the ability to recognize and love Hashem and to strive towards achieving such a love which is so boundless that even if it means martyrdom, sanctifying God's name, how many tens of thousands of Jews throughout the Holocaust, throughout the Inquisition, throughout history, were willing to martyr themselves as an expression of their love for God. This is the uniqueness of Klal Yisrael. This is the meaning of the covenant that we share and have with God. May the Almighty inspire us and arouse us to realize the burning fire that lies deeply within our neshamas, and let the sparks of these fires burst into flames that open our hearts and open our souls and allow us to realize the privilege and the great honor of being Hashem's chosen people. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay Jewish. Have a good Shabbos.